Hey there, good people in crypto land. I'm Matt Lysing, and this is my podcast, Decent People. Welcome back to the conversation. Today, I spoke with Mike Wasyl. He is the co-founder and CEO of Bracket Labs. Bracket is doing what a lot of folks in DeFi are doing these days and bringing traditional financial products on-chain and into the DeFi world. In the case of Bracket, they're doing it with option strategies, and they're trying to mainstream leverage structured products. I know that might sound scary to some of you if you know what happened in the financial crisis and how structured products can get very complicated and risky. But by being on chain, Bracket is able to have kind of bumpers on its trades so that if you're in a range with some options contracts, you can bet, for example, that you think Ethereum is going to stay around the $1,800 range, which it's been doing for months now. And if you had that trade on Bracket, you could be making money through that sideways lack of volatility. So we talked about that. We talked about Mike's time at Bloomberg, where he was an analyst in the compliance department. And we talked about just his kind of the regulatory environment that they're seeing right now in the United States, which as was quite bleak. As a case in point, Bracket is not offering its services to anybody in the US and they're going offshore. You've heard a lot about that. Here's a case of it in the real world. We had just a good long conversation, and the kind of takeaway was that Bracket Labs is trying to make structured products fun. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Let's get to it. Thanks. Hey, Mike. Thanks for coming on the show. Welcome.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I've been excited to talk to you. We have some common work experience at Bloomberg, and you were around at ConsenSys at a time when I knew most of the folks over there. Been looking forward to hearing your story. I thought to jump in, though, because regulation is a bit of a top of mind right now, we might talk about that. And I'd love to hear your take on where the U.S. is right now, because what you guys are doing at Bracket Labs, it seems to me you're offering kind of sophisticated products on chain that are structured and have leverage. So I'm sure you guys are minding your P's and Q's on the regulatory front. So, what's the lay of the land like right now, in your opinion, in the U.S. for crypto?
The U.S. has been a little disappointing, to be honest. There's not a lot of clarity in how things are being treated. I think in the vacuum that Congress has ultimately created by not passing good legislation, they've had plenty of time to do it, to be honest. They basically left the room for these agencies to go, above and beyond what a lot of people think is their, jurisdiction and kind of making rules, which is they're supposed to be enforcing, and they're trying to force compliance with regulations, but the law is like a blurry line, right, between regulation and law. It's what is new, what is not new, and the SEC is asserting certain things, CFTC asserting others. I think on the good side, we've seen a couple of positive things happen. So number one is the CFTC has created a working group specifically for digital assets and has invited several companies from the digital asset space, including Uniswap. I think they have some folks that sit there. And there's been a couple of bills that have been posited by House Republicans, I believe, but I don't know if they're going to really get anywhere even if they pass the House.
Yeah, we've been reporting on that.
Yeah.
They've been introduced in committee. If anyone knows how Congress works, that's the very first step of a long process.
It's a long process, and it's really split on party lines. You have Patrick McHenry, who's basically saying, hey, we need legislation. We're trying to push this forward. And then you have ranking member Waters on the other side saying, hey, we've been quote unquote trying to work diligently on this for 15 months or something. And this is a move to destabilize our markets. And that's all very concerning to see that it's that split. But in the meantime, you have giant companies like PayPal who are looking at crypto and saying, hey, the real product market fit, the real killer app is stablecoins, and payments always has been that for the longest time. And so that's, I think like those guys are seeing and seeing that and saying, hey, we're going to just take a little bit of a risk here working with Paxos, as Paxos has been. They worked with Binance and were told to shut them. I don't know if they were told to shut them down, but it was definitely an act of government saying, hey, we got to get this under control. And so I'm really curious to see how that plays out.
Isn't it interesting, though, that we all get excited about PayPal coming into this, which is a centralized authority that can censor your transactions, everything that crypto was not supposed to be. And yet we're seeing this as like a shining light that PayPal is going to come in and make it okay for everybody.
I think the primary reason for that is because the DeFi ecosystem and even the Web3 ecosystem as it is, let's look back like 3 years, right? As we saw the kind of boom in DeFi summer, the original just experimentation of on-chain finance stuff. Then we saw NFTs as digital assets, natively digital assets. So these are all like these proto versions of what eventually will happen. But the user base is still very small. It's a pond. It's a tiny pond. And so I think what people are excited about is the general acceptance of Ethereum as the foundational chain. Which is a lot of
basically, right?
Yeah, it's base layer. It's a huge vote of confidence in its security. And then the second thing is just the increasing of the pie. We need the pie to get bigger. There's so many creative, and even ourselves, like so many creative, innovative products, but without clarity or a big enough pond, essentially, you have trouble getting traction, and you have trouble getting the type of buy-in that you need from global economies beyond the United States. But yeah, that's a good point about PayPal. It does have censorship built in, but most of the major stablecoins have blacklisting built in as well. So they do have this almost in programmatic AML a little bit incorporated. So it is an existing systemic risk across all of crypto today, even on Ethereum.
Yeah, I take your point too, because like you're saying, like the purely decentralized apps that are out there and things you can use are appeal to a very small group of people. And I think maybe to go back a little bit on what I said, maybe the PayPals of the world are needed to bridge people into this, and then they can then go and get more confidence and start using Uniswap or start using Bracket Labs.
Yeah, start using anything. And there's so many great utilities that are built in DeFi, from playing markets to earning base rate and liquid staking and things. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. It's basically a reach from the corporates who are saying our business model is going to be under threat if we don't do something.
Yeah.
And then you have Circle who's saying we need to get more users. And I think that competitiveness is going to make this pie a lot bigger over the next 5-year time horizon. Not to say we're not going to have hiccups and issues, especially in the US, because there is no MiCA standard that is put a goal on X, Y, and Z. There is no
What's
US
MiCA,
VASP.
just for people who might not know?
Sorry. Yeah, the EU basically has put forward their revised transfer of fund regulations for crypto assets, like travel rule, which basically says, hey, over a certain threshold, you need to have XYZ, like KYC, AML requirements. And that basically underpins virtual assets service providers, which the rest of the world are pretty much adopting. The standard that the regulator in Europe, FATF, has put forward. Hey, here are the standards for VASPs. And most of the world that kind of copies that or member states are going to adopt it. And so US is very much behind. I think most people most congressional leaders see that we're behind. They just don't know exactly how to do this, or they're hesitant to do this depending on what side of the aisle they're on. Because it's a massive move. It's a massive move to digital assets.
I agree. And I was going to ask so the SEC basically is getting its authority here from the Securities Exchange Act, which dates to the 30s, and then also the Howey decision, which was a court decision that created the Howey test about what is a security. Are those things okay? Is that a good foundation here, or do we need a whole new set of laws to address smart contracts and the way that things there might not be an intermediary in some of these transactions, and that's not something I think that the securities laws are built for. So it sounds like you're saying, and I think I'd agree with you, we need a new set of laws to address this.
Yeah, I think the reasonable thing to do would be to revise the law and say, Howey test makes sense for traditional securities with traditional intermediaries, broker dealers, and what have you. But if you extend those laws or those standards to crypto, you start to see where it doesn't really make sense. And it's not that crypto. I think there are bad actors in crypto, just like people from the outside listening to this, they might say, hey, crypto has a lot of scams and a lot of issues. And I absolutely agree with you. There's a lot of that going on. But it's not happening because that happens in every industry that's financial, right? It's always happened. You're probably yourself a historian of financial happenings, right? And that is the truth. When there's a regulatory vacuum, generally people take advantage of the loophole. It's a very cutthroat, zero-sum type of industry.
Yeah, and it's exactly why there are all these regulations that we're talking about in the first place.
Right, it's because
your customer, anti-money laundering.
The bucket shops of the 20s. Right. They're like, okay, we can't have this anymore because it led to one of the largest financial collapses in the world. And now we had Dodd-Frank after 2008, and now we need something for crypto that puts up the bumper lanes. Now everyone wants the bumper lanes, I think. They just don't want to be completely shut off from the bowling alley. And I think that's what the problem is now. It's like with this new, we had this case come across with the U.S. District Judge, Annalisa Torres, for Ripple, which is this long. For those who are listening or not familiar, it's this long-standing case with the SEC, basically SEC suing Ripple, saying, hey, you sold securities. And Ripple basically, you could say, quote unquote, won that exchange over after many years, saying that the way that those assets were sold, where there was no expectation of profit, the actual token itself to retail, but they did violate SEC norms in sales to institutional folks, which is in most pundits' mind in crypto is a massive success. But that'll be challenged because there's plenty of cases in the same court that are challenging what a security is in crypto, and that's still an ongoing thing. So to summarize, I do think that we need a new set of rules that basically has a better understanding of, or takes into account the nature of decentralized finance, the nature of smart contracts. There's a spectrum of decentralization, but I think what we don't want to have happen is trying to stuff DeFi into the broker-dealer box, or at least if you are going to do that, have a separate set of rules that are a little bit more, I wouldn't say lax, but just understanding that it's not 1985 anymore, and the average company is not going to be able to afford a $5 million licensing process. It takes years. And I think several jurisdictions around the world have been very open to that. Dubai and the VARA regulator over there, virtual asset regulator, and some other regions are actually quite open to not having double jeopardy. If it falls under a virtual asset service provider type business, that's all you need to do. There's no additional securities licensing. And unfortunately, doing that disrupts the status quo. And that's a huge problem for special interests in our government in the United States and around the world, in many places where they're very competitive. They have a lead. They don't want to disrupt the status quo. Yeah. So it is a massively disruptive force. And that's why I think the U.S. is taking its time. And I highly doubt we'll see something super positive come out in this administration except maybe with stable coins. But other than that, I don't think we'll see anything.
There's a lot of money at stake here, a lot of market share. And I mean, we're talking about payments, we're talking about
the biggest
global
business
payment
in the world
rails that are basically uncensorable. So we'll get into this a little bit more later, but with Bracket, what you guys are doing is you're offering mainstream leveraged structured products in a decentralized way so you can leverage options strategies, which is quite complicated, and usually that's the realm of very sophisticated investors. But just to stay on the regulation topic for 1 second, how are you going about that and hoping to offer these products in the United States when usually you have to be like an accredited investor, or you have to have a certain amount of money, and there are kind of tests that are done so that mom and pop folks don't get in here and lose their life savings. So how are you walking that line?
So as of now, we do not offer our products to U.S. citizens, Canadian citizens, restricted countries, OFAC list members. We're actually extremely restrictive in how we offer products, primarily because of the reasons you noted, that first of all, there's no clear delineation between DeFi and finance right now. So it's kind of regulation by enforcement. And second, because it just doesn't make sense to take that risk, and nor do we want to. And we're also in the process of setting up in a more friendly region to sit under the compliance that we can there. The big thing here is that I think companies like ourselves, we want to be compliant, right? We want to go to a place where we can operate. And right now we're being forced offshore to do anything, even if we're not servicing the US.
Right.
It's very frustrating because it's not like we don't want to be compliant. Even if I'd love to offer services in the US, we just can't. Right. It's just not something we can do. And so the way we're doing it is basically saying we're going to have to go offshore. And maybe that's what they wanted, right? We're very small. We're super tiny. We're basically at the moment still experimental, but I'd imagine regulators don't want to see like larger DeFi protocols, ones that have like billions of dollars in them. Those who are become systemically important hurt U.S. investors. And I understand that's a reasonable need. But in order to foster innovation here, you need to engage with the community, engage with the industry, and present some reasonable ways to stay compliant without being attacked. And it's the last thing I think the industry needs to see more and more DeFi products just get smashed because they were not following the rules that they don't even know. They're driving on a highway, they don't know the speed limit. And so it's basically forcing companies like ourselves to just say, hey, we're just not offering services here and we're moving.
And was that always
yeah.
was that always the plan, or did this change when the regulatory environment shifted, or were you guys always going to start offshore and then hope to bring it to the U.S.?
Yeah, I think we've always really thought about, like in the very beginning, we said, hey, maybe we can see how it plays out, right? Because things change pretty quickly. But as we realized that the regulators were not going to budge on some of these issues, it was just a dog and pony show to show that they're supporting the industry or not or whatever. We said, hey, we're going to just have to be offshore completely, test our assumptions in markets that are more favorable to us, and then hopefully bring it back in a regulated, compliant package, whether that be a VASP offshore, like somewhere like the BVI, or hopefully the US has got something by then. But if they don't, going through a traditionally licensed company who wants to move into DeFi. But at the current rate, we don't see any path forward to actually offer services in the US to US customers in the short term.
So where are you going to offer services, like in other parts of the world?
Or yeah, I think our primary audience
headquartering is somewhere like the British Virgin Islands.
We're in the process of that, so I can't really speak to it yet. But the markets that make the most sense are the ones that are like most open. So, for instance, Asia, there's certain Asian regions that are quite open to these types of products. There are some European countries that are open to these types of products, and it's up to the customer to know their own regulatory climate. They should follow our terms of service, not use VPNs and that stuff to access the services. And I think that's the primary concern in DeFi, is that while we can, and every company really, you're putting forward your rules, you're putting forward your terms, you're trying to block the right people can interact with smart contracts and things of that nature. And so it's a blurry line. And I think the best thing we could do is pursue a regulated environment, perhaps a VASP, when it's like a 6-month process to get that, and in order to get approved to operate with larger institutional money or with accredited investors. But for now, you have to just go where the markets are a little more allowing and test in a tiny, like in basically a puddle. And that's the unfortunate part, is that you're testing in a puddle.
A very small sample size. So it's an interesting point you bring up about people being able to interact with smart contracts, because like Tornado Cash is still out there. You can still go use it. You can't take that down. You're probably going to get in trouble if you do. And then also, I think just this is the problem right now, is that you guys are U.S. folks. You want to be creating this here in the United States, but you can't. And it's like that lack of clarity and the slowness on the part of Congress, and then the overzealous enforcement at the SEC is you're a prime example of what people are talking about. It's like this stuff is moving offshore, but it's not stopping. And so
it's absolutely not stopping. Just to be clear, we've never offered services to U.S. customers, but even if we wanted to, we'd have to go back through a regulated entity, through someone who already has it. And that's fine. At that point, if there's enough market interest in these areas, then that's worth the partnership, it's worth the money, it's worth the whatever. But in the very beginning of any kind of company that's trying to innovate, it costs millions of dollars to go through some of these processes, whereas the rest of the world is moving to more of a VASP structure that maybe only costs $100,000, which is not great either, but it's not the end of the world. It's a half a year process, 100,000 or whatever, so it takes time to get it, and like a lot of these regions have just started to put them in place. To put a number on that, only about 11 of the 98 FATF members of that regulatory body have even gotten close to the compliance requirements that they've set forth.
Yeah.
So it's actually a minority of places and a minority of companies who are registering, usually those who are very well resourced, who can afford it and manage it and do all the little things that need to be done. But we welcome, as a company, we welcome regulation. We welcome going to these areas where it's compliant, BVI, all these, Dubai, because it gives clarity and it allows you to take in capital. And that's just been a struggle, because the world of DeFi has split into two bodies, right? It's split into this Wild West utility body where it's like, nope, we're going to be open. We're going to be completely decentralized as much as we can be, as much as anyone could be, and operating anything like that. But also just offering it to anybody with very few restrictions, maybe some programmatic restrictions on restricted lists or OFAC or something, some blacklists, but otherwise being completely open. And then others who are offering maybe a more tailored product for an institutional or accredited investor who goes through the traditional KYC, AML things, And it's very difficult and challenging to do traditional KYC and AML on a wallet without linking it to a real identity. You just can't really do that. And so it does require the traditional tools. And at that point, you end up, there's a lot of the DeFi audience that just doesn't want to do that right now.
Right.
And that will change for sure. But if you want to do anything in DeFi, it's going to be a tiny pond until the rest of the world can operate in it safely. So actually for us, we're saying, hey, we kind of embrace that. We want that to happen ultimately. And we want to get there. It's just a process to get the appropriate things to make it happen.
Let's go back a little bit, Mike, to before you were at Bracket and the co-founder and CEO. What were you like as a kid? Were you always financially minded, or what kind of started you on this path?
I was always pretty entrepreneurial. I've always been involved in little businesses, working for myself, creating stuff just to make money for myself. I always really wanted to be my own boss. It wasn't more or less about making a fortune. It was about just having the freedom and autonomy. But yeah, as a kid, I wasn't the most financially minded. I wasn't always like a markets person. That changed probably when I was in college. As throughout high school, I was working in the business club and things like that. So just business minded. But it wasn't until college that I discovered markets, really.
And what was it? What intrigued you about that discovery? What aspect of it?
I think it was just the accretive nature of finance. Reading books about how compound interest works. I think that was the number one driver of, oh, wow, you can build wealth over time. And of course, my generation doesn't necessarily, I'm 32, and my generation didn't exactly have the same experience as previous generations in that wealth building path. But at least I understood the concepts and how to apply them. And so I started looking more deeply into how I would eventually get involved there. Because at first I was not eager to be involved in finance. I graduated high school in 2009. So coming out of the recession, I was pretty bitter to the financial industry and kind of the greed, and very frustrated about that.
What did that look like to you as a high school student going through the financial crisis?
Yeah, luckily my family wasn't as affected as some others might have been, like job-wise. My dad is a dentist, so it was a slightly less impactful thing. It was a local business essentially, so it was pretty isolated. But when it comes to just systemic threats to people that I knew in my community, it was a big deal. And a lot of people had trouble with college and couldn't go on trips, and just basic things that you start noticing. And then you start noticing real destitution. Hey, we got to move, and things of that nature. And so it did affect me. I saw back in the day, the Occupy Wall Street stuff, and I was like, wow, this could have been prevented. And I see some of the repeat of that now, because regulators have been asleep at the wheel for whatever reason. They have felt no need to step in and say, hey, this is what's going to be. There's the clarity. Let's go, right? For whatever reason, we discussed that.
Well, I think the reason is it's money. There were moves in legislation at the midnight hour to, for example, the over-the-counter derivatives market was exempted from all sorts of regulations, and that's one of the major problems in the financial crisis. Of course, there was horrible lending practices, but the OTC market,
central clearing, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, and that was because the banks were making a shit ton of money in that business. The interest rate swap desk at ICAP was called Treasure Island for a reason.
Making insane money. Easy money, printing it, and basically that never lasts. At the time, I don't think I was sophisticated enough to understand what was going on. But when I got into college and started just researching it on my own and understanding all the little bits and pieces that what happened, I just realized how greedy people can be in traditional finance, how opaque those markets can be, but also how restrictive they are to the accumulation of wealth for young people who said we were promised after the 90s a better world. And then we had 2001, which brought people together, but also created would ultimately lead to an insane spend of our wealth as America. And then we had the recession, and now we have COVID. And so there was just these multiple once in a lifetime events. I think you probably heard that trope before, but these multiple once in a lifetime events that I think really stirred me up. And I said, man, I'd like to see what this is all about, because the financial markets and the financial world, because it was very distant to me. I had no one that actually worked in the industry in my family. And I got this incredible opportunity after high school. So my dad died when I was 15. And it's okay. And I had no male guidance like, hey, this is what you should do. I was trying to figure it out. And I had a very lucky break where I had an opportunity to interview for an internship at Bloomberg. This was during college, like after college, where I was ambling around. I didn't really have a good direction even in college. And I had the opportunity essentially to interview for a role there, like an internship role. And I was like, you know what, this sounds like way over my pay grade. I was a kid from New Jersey. I wasn't expecting to work in some sort of like financial company. I was not exposed to that at all. I lived in a pretty rural community in western central Jersey, probably I say 15 minutes from Princeton, but realistically it was a town called Montgomery. It was a real pretty, at that time, it was pretty suburban and rural. It was middle class for sure, but pretty isolated from the goings on of finance. And at that point I had this opportunity, and that's how the Bloomberg thing comes up.
And what did you end up doing there at Bloomberg?
So this is where maybe my interview skills came in handy. So I basically had at that point realized that compared to my peers, I wasn't potentially the most qualified. I studied business in college and English as well because I was going to go to law school. To be honest with you, I was like, you know what, I think this could be a good path for me at the time. And the opposite of financial markets, I was looking to be on the other side of the house. And I was like, okay, maybe this is something I want to do. And then by the end of college, I said, you know what, I need to make some money here. Like I need to actually, and I also wanted to just explore the industry. Mm-hmm. And so with this opportunity, I said, hey, why not? Let me try to get in and just understand where I might, if I could fit in this at all, because it's an opportunity. And it's like one of those things, I forget which comedian said it, but it's like picking up flags. When you have flags in your life that say, hey, it's time to go a different direction. You sometimes have to just listen. Yeah. And so I did that. And when I came into the intern class, it was me and a bunch of friends. I still hold today, still have a great amount of respect. To be honest, a lot of that intern class actually are working in crypto at the current moment. Yeah, Jan Lieberman, guys like that who Delphi Labs. Like we interned together, or at least worked together. I'm not sure if he was in the intern class, but we did work together for a short time there.
It's funny you mention that because like when I was at Bloomberg reporting on market structure, that was my beat. Like a lot of the market structure people that I knew in the industry have now gone into crypto. So I think if you know how the markets work or don't work and how they're broken in many ways, and then crypto comes along, it looks like a great opportunity.
Great point. A lot of those folks did end up being very influential in crypto or getting involved in crypto in some way. And so the path there was basically, hey, I don't think I was the most qualified, to be honest. And I basically told them that in the interview for the role. And they're like, you know what? We need people that are not necessarily financial or like finance majors. Sometimes we need to figure out other problems, and having an outside perspective could be helpful. And so what I ended up doing was working on this small team on the compliance desk, essentially the message compliance desk. So you may or may not have run across that team when you were at Bloomberg. Basically, our job was to organize and kind of rehash trades that happened on the Bloomberg terminal and messages, and put together a picture of what happened for the head of trading desks and such. And so the enterprise part of that team was called Bloomberg Vault. Yeah, and basically that was this Dodd-Frank compliance team that basically was responsible.
And that's like when somebody's got a problem, right? And they need help.
Pretty much. They come to you with a problem. So I was 22 or whatever years old, and I interned just doing basic things at Bloomberg before Vault, actually. I was just doing basic things for looking over Form 4s and all that and processing them in mass as like a human computer. But I got exposure to what wealthy people were doing, how they trade, how they hide things. And it was really scary. I was like, this is a different world for me. It's like the world without training wheels. And that's stuff they don't teach you in school, no matter what you do. You learn the inside baseball of all that. And when I got the opportunity to actually work full time at the end, that's the Vault team was the one that would hire me. And I said, you know what, I'll just do it. Like, why not? This is interesting. And I'll get a picture of the world I never had before. And
free snacks and a crazy building in New York City.
Princeton, worked in Princeton and New York, mostly in Princeton. And then I did some time in New York with the Vault team for meetings and client meetings and such. But yeah, they basically locked you in, right? You drove your car up there, you parked it, and you couldn't get out until the end of the day.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because the newsroom is like that, and I've heard that other parts of the company were a little more relaxed. And I remember talking about rich people, seeing like really rich people who'd come in and they'd be on TV, and then they'd be walking out with their bag, and they would just be putting like cookies and chips and stuff into their.
Oh yeah, it was bizarre.
Like, yeah, it's so crazy. World. Like you're a billionaire and you're like raiding the Bloomberg pantry.
Yeah, it was a bizarre world. You had people who were, I don't want to say has been or anything like that, because actually most people there are super great people, but a lot of people who had careers in New York who wanted a more quiet life got transferred into the Princeton office and were working back office style jobs, or occasionally went on TV and did stuff because they were area experts. So it was also a place for people coast a little bit, I felt. Not to say anything bad about Bloomberg. I absolutely loved working there. They gave me my start, and they're an incredible company. But it was a weird dynamic at the time, like back in that era. it was a strange dynamic. You had some real hitter people and you had some real kind of lifer people that were there the whole.
Man, you should have been there in 2004 when I joined. It was like
everyone says that.
They used to have shoe shine guys that would come through the newsroom and like you could give them your shoes and they'd go take them away and shine them and bring them back. It was like working at Brooks or Solomon Brothers, like Bloomberg did,
I heard that the early 2000s were an absolute insane period of growth for Bloomberg, and I was at the tail end of that. And so terminal sales were leveling off. I soured to it eventually just because bonuses. I didn't get it. I was looking back at like my starting salary was nothing compared to say a banker's starting salary, but because I was basically a data junkie at first, right? A data monkey, and then I eventually moved up to where I was going to client meetings and such, and interfacing with clients, like just daily, big, important clients. And part of that was just realizing, hey, maybe this golden era of this company is coming to a close almost. Like they were souring to innovation there at the time. Not just me, but others had recommended crypto stuff at the time.
I remember fighting with people. Like I was like, you guys should be on the business side at Bloomberg. They should have been all in on crypto.
They should have been.
It would have been a great opportunity.
They had the opportunity early to basically own it. People, like smart people, I wouldn't say it was my idea at all, but I know smart people, I won't name, but other people who worked at Bloomberg with me who were incredible minds and thinking very far ahead, and were like, you need to cover crypto, we need to cover the data for Bitcoin. And it was laughed out of the office at the time. I mean, it was mentioned on TV. Bloomberg would mention it. Bitcoin's doing well or Bitcoin's suffering, but it was just a sideshow. It wasn't any kind of a serious thing. And now they have an entire division.
I wasn't the first, but I was one of the first reporters to start really covering crypto in 2015. And I remember there was just a huge reputational risk, I think, that they had. That they were very scared. All they could think of was like Silk Road and Mt. Gox. And,
that's the narrative. It still is the narrative for a lot of people. I think it's changing now because people are starting to see the adoption in the institutional trusted parties, like saying, hey, this is something we want to pay attention to. But I think the level of cope we're at is like a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, where people are saying, you know what, it's just another asset class, no big deal, another risk on asset class. I don't think people have even the average finance guys made that next step and said, okay, this is actually something really systemically important, and we need to be considering it just as much as fiat or anything else as far as markets are concerned. And at Bloomberg, my first interaction with crypto was I'll say cryptography, was at a distance, basically doing key-to-key encryption for some parts of our message system. And I was responsible for certain elements of that. And without getting too much detail, I was thinking to myself, like, wow, this is pretty cool tech. What else is there out there in this capacity? Because you're just reading to learn about certain things as a subject matter expert. And you start to discover, that's where I started to uncover things about Ethereum and programmatic money and global settlement computer. And I was like, wow, this idea, Bitcoin is fantastic. And I kept it at a distance. I wasn't really super into it as it was, but Ethereum really got me going. And I had a friend who said, you need to pay attention to this, right? And after that point, I started looking very deeply into the asset and said, this is an incredible piece of technology that it seems silly today. And I don't think a lot of us really took the initiative to expose it ourselves.
I had that experience when I went over to ConsenSys and met Joe Lubin, and he explained the world computer to me, and my mind just went boom.
I think that's the epicenter for a lot of people's curiosities when they figure out that the settlement of assets, of trades, or of exchange of anything digital could happen in a decentralized fashion, more decentralized fashion. That blows people's minds. You don't need to have, you don't need to have central clearing. You don't need to have all these parties that are taking fees. You can just have one powerful consensus that basically takes care of that. And you can have programmatic things there.
How'd you land there? You started in 2018, I think?
Yeah. So basically from 2015 to 2017, I was just on my own in crypto. I was like, I need to work on this. So I quit Bloomberg, dabbled around in some other things for a while, but ultimately was just so drawn to crypto that I had to just do it, right? I was just researching full-time, trading during this big run up, and on my own, just experimenting. And by the time 2017 was starting to roll around, end of 2016, I was like, this is going to go somewhere. I saw the hype phase and I was like, all right, this is obviously a speculative cycle. I think everyone saw that at that point. But I knew that out of speculation comes something good always. Usually there's some nugget of goodness that comes out of that. And so I basically just was bugging consent. One of my friends actually, who I won't name, but is involved at a very high level in crypto at a major financial institution at the time, where was working on a startup and was a consultant. And we met at an event, and he's like, if you want to work in this industry full time, you got to try ConsenSys. They're like the best, right? And this is soon after they started. Of course, it was not the early days. It wasn't that at all, but it was the big hiring boom. But that whole year, I was basically just bugging ConsenSys, anyone I could at that company, to give me a shot. And I was just telegramming people, emailing people over the course of about 6 to 8 months. It took me to finally get in at the ConsenSys Capital team, which did some of the token stuff. It did some consulting work, Token Foundry at a distance, and all these different projects. And so I've managed to get an interview there, and they were looking for someone that had this business sense, but it could also digest more technical papers and distill that. And so that was where I found my stride there.
And were they some of the other projects there? Was it like Ujo music?
Oh yeah, tons of early experimentation with identity, with music, with sports. I think they actually did have everything.
Come out of there at that point?
Yes, yeah. MetaMask had just started, and that's why I think personally I really loved because I've been around it for so long. But it was basically a period of time that saw the creation of the earliest primitive apps that were the model for everybody else.
Yeah.
The coolest, even though I think they actually did have the right ideas from a lot of these apps. Many of them were just way, way too early. They had real world asset stuff. They had ID, just too early.
Yeah. I did a lot of reporting on this project that I thought was really cool. It was a guy who was decentralizing like solar power and putting, grid. That's right.
Yeah.
And
really cool stuff.
Yeah, he was doing it with people in Brooklyn in my neighborhood, and I just could not get that story because it was so early. Yeah. It was like what they wanted to do was somehow track the green energy that was being created by the solar panels with a blockchain that then you could use, so you could be like off the grid. At that point, all that energy got sent over to PG&E when it got mixed with everything else. So there was no way to, I don't know if that's still the case, but anyway, it was a very fascinating idea, but it's just not something that I could turn into a concrete news story. But there was a lot of that great thinking.
Oh man, those days were so exciting just because of the experimentation. Joe's a pioneer, right? He just had this vision that I think even a lot of the people that came there were like a little skeptical about, but ultimately trusted him that he knew what direction this went. And he was right. He was right about a lot of these things that seem absolutely crazy. It seemed at the time absolutely crazy that we would threaten, not I would say threaten, but that we would have that Ethereum would grow to this enormous size, that it could potentially be the foundation for all of finance.
Yeah.
And that was a wild idea. Even the early stages of NFTs and art and CryptoKitties, I remember when it was clogging Ethereum when I was there, just crazy things that were so far-fetched and so crazy at the time, but now make perfect sense in retrospect. That was probably the most amazing experience. I think my entire career so far was just being there during that time.
Yeah, Joe is a true visionary. I think I said absolutely. In my book, he's a true believer from the very beginning.
For sure.
And he was so important to that project because there were a lot of brilliant people working on it, but Joe had the ability to explain it to people and to put it out there into the public realm and get people to get excited about it.
He really did. He was the best. He was on CNBC and all these things. You probably saw, probably even on Bloomberg back then, just constantly explaining what's going on. Yeah. He was the first voice of reason from the industry that I think made sense. There's been a lot of Bitcoiners that had basically espoused their kind of viewpoint, and that's a viewpoint that not everyone shares. The more Bitcoin maxi position.
Right, like it's going to replace the dollar.
Or it's just that it's going to be the global reserve currency. And that might be true. I don't know. But it is a single myopic viewpoint. And I think they might be right. But it didn't explain to the average person why they should care and or how they could even use this stuff.
Yeah.
And it still is struggling. I think crypto actually struggles with a massive adoption and UX problem. And that's part and parcel to like what we do, but also to just why our pond is so small and why for DeFi it's really just a puddle.
Yeah. Let's jump into Bracket Labs.
Yeah, sure.
Where did the idea come from? What was the problem that you wanted to solve?
So actually it started very differently than what it is today. So when we originally looked at crypto, my team, a small team, which came out of all of the businesses, relationships that we've had recently, my one co-founder, Pelly, she and I worked together on an advisory firm called DeerCreek. And we basically were like, hey, we really need to move into products eventually. We need to get get to this point. After we left ConsenSys together, we actually said, hey, let's work together on this business. And we've been working together ever since. And then we met our third co-founder, our CTO, Jason, a little bit soon after, probably 2021. And we said, hey, what can we actually solve that makes sense on the product side? And originally we said, can we provide users with more comfort in trading crypto assets as far as like downside protection? Because at the time, things were extremely volatile, right? Mm-hmm. Things were extremely volatile. People were losing money quickly because they didn't know what they were buying, or they didn't know that things could be that volatile. Volatility in crypto it's more of a fat tail asset. So you have these moments of extreme volatility, and then you have a sideways kind of chop, and then another moment of extreme volatility and sideways chop. Even in trending markets, it tends to behave like that from a volatility perspective. And so when the markets changed, and unfortunately we had some kind of poor timing after we started the business, the markets just completely collapsed after the Terra thing happened. Terra Luna, if you're familiar with that whole fiasco, the kind of death spiral of the asset. And then we had the FTX problem. And so markets the liquidity got sucked out of the markets. And basically we were left with some core DeFi experimenters and gambling, right? Not gambling, people who were just messing around.
Monkey JPEGs.
Yeah, just funky JPEGs, all kinds of wild stuff. And so we said, okay, how can we, with the initial concept of providing almost like an insurance product to people who are buying on major exchanges, with the kind of outflow of capital and no inflow of new people that needed that kind of product, what can we do with the technology that we developed to make it useful? And we said volatility, people have lots of different ways to play directional price. You can buy a perp, you can buy a leveraged long, you can do that. You can just buy long, you can buy short, you can play margin. But there's no way to say, I don't know if I really know which direction the market's going to go. I just know things are going to be chaotic or not chaotic. And just having that kind of exposure simply in a very simple package was not a possibility before. As you mentioned, doing anything with structured products, and for those who are not familiar with them, basically taking a derivative, say an option or several options, and creating this effect. Right. Oh, this makes money in these conditions, or this product makes
like
money in these conditions.
Or something.
Yeah, collar, an iron condor, any of these wild kind of ideas.
So you've got
like
one, just to slow down for people, you've got one option that is in the money if things go down, and then one option that's in the money if things go up, and you bracket them like bracket labs, right? And that's so in the in between those two options, that's a great place for you to make money with that strategy.
People don't even understand they don't understand the more complex jargon of finance. No one really does, right? It's meant to be that way for a lot of reasons. And I've learned that over the years. It's just this obfuscating force that keeps people out. And it's also like you said, it is inherently complex. Trading structured products or creating option strategies, making money when something hits a certain price on the upside or the downside, and packaging that into something that is coherent and cohesive and hedged out or whatever is very challenging. Right. It's for the almost the most sophisticated people, and it's a massive market in traditional finance. However, the average user, even in DeFi, is less sophisticated and they want more fun. But the effects of structured products are great. People can get exposure to just volatility within a range of price or in general. That's what we figured out how to do. We said, whoa, we could actually take what options did for traditional finance and try to create a native version of that on crypto without all the issues and complexities that you have for TradFi that are very specific to the infrastructure of traditional finance. For instance, the pricing of these products in traditional finance can be repriced the premium, like what you would pay to get exposure to a certain asset or a certain product. That can be done at the speed of light almost, right? Because of fat pipes, the hardware that traditional finance has developed, very quick. But blockchains don't work like that. Blockchains work very distinctly around having a transaction get confirmed. That takes a little time, even on the fastest blockchains. And so we said that model of pricing just won't work on chain. So to solve a problem, for instance, how can we give users the exposure to simple structured products that deliver a desired effect without having to put together all this craziness? How could we do that with traditional products? We had to change them. And so part of our fundamental innovation is taking these otherwise super traditional things and rebuilding them for an adaptive pricing model on chain without getting into nitty gritty, basically making it work for on chain. And we could at that point create really interesting volatility based products. Markets go up, they go down, they're chaotic, that don't necessarily rely on price.
Yeah.
And that is very useful for even the novice trader who says, I don't know which direction markets are going. I just want something that can pay me if it gets if it gets volatile, if it gets crazy.
Right.
And that's something that's super useful for most traders.
Let me ask you this, though. In the traditional financial world, derivatives are usually restricted because the downside is unlimited, right? There is no with a derivative.
It can be, not necessarily, but it can be unlimited if you're doing
the losses that you
positions.
can accrue on a derivative are far greater than a stock can just go to zero, but a derivative can keep going past zero, and so that's why they're treated this way. How are you going to make sure that doesn't happen to retail folks in the DeFi space that you're aiming at here?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. I think in any product, whether that be perps, right, perpetual futures, or any kind of popular DeFi product, they're always trying to build something in that puts some guardrail up.
Yeah,
people are excited. Users are in DeFi are excited by leverage. They're excited by the potential of upside and maybe the lack of downside. And so the way we did it is we in the name bracket, right? There's a limited range over which you can make money or in which you make money. For instance, our biggest kind of new product concept, and we've experimented with, as I've mentioned already, plenty of different types of use cases of this fundamental pricing technology that we developed, this bracketed pricing. And what we've come up with is a product that works well just for volatility. Is it volatile? Is it not? The original kind of attempt at that was called Channel. And basically that did deliver a leveraged payout over a range. And basically you had to, as the buyer, you wanted the asset to stay within a certain price range. And it made money the longer it stayed in until it first broke out. So it was very simple. The concept was very simple. But the way that our model works is that you're not going to get, there's no like way you can lose more money than you put in.
So it's like smart contract based, and if it hits a certain target,
fully decentralized, not fully, but like the smart contract control the funds. So that's where all the execution happens.
Yeah.
And so your funds are always in your control. In other words, it's like you would in other DeFi products.
Like
but
you
yes,
said, this is on chain, which is cool. And then I love that, like with a smart contract, you like when. If it's happening in other parts of DeFi, right? When you get liquidated because your collateral has reached a certain point, that's it. It's automatic and you're out of that trade. So that's how the brackets work here as well. You just program.
Yeah, there's no product that we offer where you can lose more than you have, in other words. And actually in the new product that we're releasing, which is an amalgamation of everything we've learned about, we've basically done a bunch of soft launches with like products that we've come out with that where I think we're really quite good products, but because the market is the way it is and market makers and others are not really providing funding, it's heavily reliant on appropriate pricing. And when there's no appropriate pricing, obviously it looks like it's not attractive. But in the newest product we're coming out with, which takes that channel concept, right? Make more money the more time it stays in a range. We call it range bound, which is something that other big exchanges are experimenting with as well, like Binance and others. This product actually, you never, as a buyer of the stay inside, hey, I want to stay in. You don't lose money more than you have. You actually accrue every second you stay in. And so we took this concept of what is traditionally someone who buys volatility, like you buying options in the real world, or you're selling volatility, right? You're writing options. That's a very complicated process. Yeah. And we basically decided, hey, let's take those kind of parties and make them a little more fun. So our product, this new product called Passage, which takes that concept from Channel, has a stay-in buyer and a breakout buyer. Someone who says, I think the asset will be not that volatile. And then the breakout buyer is saying, hey, I think the asset will be very volatile and we have a 2-day or 1-day break even on this product, for instance. And so we took that concept, distilled it down to a very simple gamified product that is fair to the buyer and the seller and actually creates a marketplace for this type of volatility that you'd be familiar with looking at, say, like a Uniswap or something. So you can buy these products and accumulate based on your position in a short-term kind of contract. And so this is something that's very, once people see it, I think they'll be like, wow, this is actually really easy to understand, and takes what is usually an extremely sophisticated thing and distills it into a product that's fair and that I think very fun. And I think it's missing from DeFi a lot.
The market structure nerd in me wants to know, like, how does that trade make money when you're in that range? Like, how are you making money from that?
Again, without getting too much in the weeds, basically what's happening is it's a matched pair. So on Passage, this new product that we'll be releasing on testnet the next month, basically what's happening is we have a peer-to-peer market. For the first time, we basically invented this in order to make it work without a market maker setting price, which is always hard, right? Because if the pricing isn't good, like I said, it doesn't work. But in this market, you have an estimated price based on our model for volatility. So it's just, and the user doesn't need to know really much about that besides that it's the kind of market price. And then it's a matched pair. So it's peer-to-peer. One person takes a stay in, the other person takes a breakout. We have an order book model, matches those folks if they cross. And that's why you have a max payout in this product of 2 times. So it's not some crazy leverage product. Mm-hmm. And we've attempted things with leverage, more leverage than that, and found out the asymmetric risk from a funder taking on a fully collateralized, volatility, like selling volatility fully collateralized, is taking on a lot of risk, and they're going to price the product pretty poorly, or at least pretty, in their mind, fairly, which might not be fun for the buyer who's taking none of that risk besides their initial investment, right? Like say $10, right? Yeah. So they're saying, in a 10 times product, I can make $100, but the funder has to lock up $100 in collateral. So it's very fair, it's fully collateralized, but the more leverage you have, sometimes the better, the worse the pricing. So in this new product, it's a matched pair, and you accumulate. If you're familiar with a corridor style product, you accumulate, but in our product, it's by time. So in a 2-day contract, the break even's 1 day. So the stay in accumulates from 0. So let's say $200 are in the pool, right, between those 2 users, peer 1, peer 2. Peer 1's taking the stay in, peer 2 is buying the breakout of that channel, that passage. The stay in buyer starts at 0 and accumulates every second. And the breakout starts at the 200 and it goes down every second. Okay. So it's a time-based payoff within a range of price. And so the price has to stay in that range.
Exactly.
And so it's really fun. It's so much fun, right? Mm-hmm. For a user to be like, I could take a position on the wildness of the market without having to really say if it's going to go up or down.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
I think you're talking about timing and sometimes bad timing, but
yeah.
I feel like on-chain summer is in full effect and you guys are on-chain. So that seems like good timing for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What you've been through this a few times now. So the bigger picture, where do you think things stand just in terms of the winter and enthusiasm of folks coming back? Do you see that anytime soon, or what's your kind of
what? It's a great question.
Stick your finger up into the wind, what do you see?
Yeah, if I'm going to shake the 8 ball and get an answer or look into the crystal ball, I'm thinking the summer is going to remain pretty slow and sideways. August is historically just low volatility in general because everyone's on vacation. Europe's off. Everyone's just not doing much. But we're talking macro, real big picture, what happens. I think there's been some really great research on the cyclical nature of crypto and how many years it takes to come back. But usually the Bitcoin halving coincides with the beginnings of the bull market. I think we're actually in the very early innings of that now. Just like you said, the quote unquote vibe shift is here, right? We have large institutions signaling that they want to support crypto. Mm-hmm. We have the largest asset manager in the world basically saying we're
BlackRock, the ETF.
Yeah, BlackRock ETF, which is an exchange traded fund, basically saying
based on Bitcoin. Yeah.
Right, based on Bitcoin, we're going to hold Bitcoin in custody and sell a fund that basically rebalances. And that's an immense positive vote of confidence. Larry Fink has also expressed that. He's CEO of the company, expressed the positive features of Bitcoin, which has been a massive change from previous comments. And I think all those things are going to coalesce into a more positive market in the fall, like late fall, early winter. And hopefully nothing macro happens besides that. But I'd imagine the markets won't really pick up until that halving event occurs going into that, I think in April 2024. So I think we will have these like sideways chop for a while, which is great for us, right? Because our passage product is actually really great for sideways chop.
Right.
But ultimately, we think that the markets will probably improve by then, given all the positive momentum, and then the election cycle kind of focusing on that for a while, and new administration coming in the next couple of years. So that's the timeline. I think things for everything to improve. But those who are building now and can survive, just keep their companies alive until then, I think are in a really good position because all the innovation's happening now.
Yeah.
All of the companies building truly innovative things.
Ask, are you not just like on the pricing side, are you getting any indications of cool new products like NFTs took everyone by storm coming out of the last crypto winter? Are you getting any indication of anything like that?
It's a split world. I think on one side, you're seeing a lot more layer 2s launching with Base and Arbitrum getting more traction, more products. But a lot of the products are very similar. So unfortunately, because perpetual futures had, like for instance, perpetual futures, right? The product took many years to actually get traction with BitMEX doing what they were doing. But then when it finally went on chain, exploded because it was a simple product. People got simple, but it was a product people could understand. Go long, add lots of leverage. Go short, add lots of leverage. Right? Very degen, extremely degen. Most people lose in that product, but still, it's very popular. Those launched all over the place with minor differences. Right? Oh, one is more leverage, one is less leverage. Obviously, it's more of an experiment in on-chain application than it is a useful financial tool for the most sophisticated investors. But those early experiments have led to some really cool concepts, some really interesting experiments in like cross margining on chain, some things that will become primitives for the next cycle and more sophisticated products. And that's the same thing we see with us too. We're innovative in the current form. Is it the final form? Probably not. We'll probably have a very niche product that ends up being popular in a niche. And then over time, as markets mature, you grow into that market. I think the most innovative thing that we've seen beyond just slight improvements or new versions of DEXs and lending and borrowing, right? The fundamentals of all markets, debt markets and things, credit, is this closing of the gap between off-chain real world, people call real world assets, RWA, and on-chain DeFi. And obviously the killer product there is the US Treasury bill. It's yielding 4 or 5% or something. And so folks really want to get access to that, especially if their capital is on chain. And so there's products like Ondo and Open Eden in Singapore that are exposing investors to on-chain to buy treasury bills, basically on-chain, and they're whitelisted, and it's a very tailored process because it is a financial product that's regulated. And I think as a result of that, we've seen early experiments with real world assets start to make sense, funding credit deals that might be difficult to fund for traditional platforms like I think it's Centrifuge that have been around for a while. Like we've seen that even in the early days of ConsenSys, basically a product that offers loans that can be collateralized by crypto, right? That can be underwritten in the Web3 space. So these crossing over of real world use cases to on-chain, I think is very exciting. And I think that was very teeny tiny for the longest time because the deals were weird. They were third world, buy now, pay later type products that were being underwritten. So very scary stuff that we've seen. But I think the long term of that is that's where it's going. Yeah, it's going to be this
what you guys
one
are
world.
Doing. You're bringing a traditional financial product on chain, and it didn't exist before, and it
didn't exist in this form. It didn't exist in this type of way. Yeah. And I think people like us that are trying to do that do have to skate the line of we're in a puddle. We have to do something fun at first, but everyone's eyes are on this giant tidal wave of real capital. The trillions of dollars sitting on the sidelines, right? We have this insane historic amount of liquidity just sitting on the sidelines that eventually will make its way into on-chain finance, as people are calling it now. And of those is successful, I think depends on the government's interest rates, right? We see usually a retraction from risk in crypto when the interest rates go up and the interest rates are down and treasuries aren't yielding, people go to more risk on assets. So I think that cyclicality will affect crypto and how we come back. But right now, that on-chain world, the treasuries on chain are allowing us a window into what could be and what people have been dreaming about for the last 5 years on Ethereum, which is a whole world of on-chain finance that blurs the line between DeFi silliness, right, and real world useful financial products that anyone of merit could use. And that world will merge. It's just going to take, I think, a little bit longer than we anticipate.
Yeah, that's my gut feeling right now too. It's not going to be retail that brings this back. It's going to be the BlackRocks and
it's very possible.
The very large institutional players who have had a lot of time to figure this out and do their research and get comfortable with it. And I think they're just waiting to get in at the right time. And then that's going to make the markets move and things will happen. And that's going to get the attention of retail folks. And hopefully there's some people out there who didn't get burned by FTX or any of the other kind of calamities that we've had in the last year or so. But I think that, that tidal wave is I think going to come from the JP Morgans and the BlackRocks.
Oh, they want it so bad. In the early days of talking to these folks, when I was at ConsenSys, they were curious, but they weren't committing. Then they were, I don't want to use the word undermining, but they tried to basically build it themselves. They have their own version of Ethereum. They have their own internal coins. Alliance. Oh yeah, all the stuff like that. That was interesting at the time. And then now I think people are just accepting the fact that while private networks will probably always exist in some sort of enclave for very specific products and very specific counterparty use cases, the big ones, the big use cases like FX are going to be on chain for real. I think we're all coming to that conclusion that the money markets, FX markets are going to be on chain. It's just so much easier to get around the red tape and cost of just sending money around and swapping money into large pools. While there were some absolute calamities with Terra and as well as recently with Curve, the idea of a massive money market on chain where you can swap in and out of highly liquid one-to-one backed stablecoins is an incredible innovation that should not be undersold.
Yeah.
And I think that in and of itself could be what brings in a lot of institutional investors to the liquidity to the utility that crypto provides. And hopefully products like us can live in that wake, right? Where they're like, oh, now I need to do this. Now I need to do that. And the product's matured and there's a more professional version. There's more sophisticated users who are actually bringing capital to do it specifically on chain as opposed to centralized exchanges that are just dealing in crypto. I think that's where the trust barrier is, and hopefully we can cross it.
Yeah. Awesome. Mike, this has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Thanks for sharing your story with me, and tell people where they can find you and how they can find more info about Bracket Labs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Twitter, mostly Rare Mike is my handle, at Rare Mike. And then Bracket Labs is at bracket_labs_. And we're basically leaking out some more information as we go on our new launch for this new product that was, again, it's called Passage, which will be out in August, end of August in testnet. And we'll be revealing a lot more about that real soon. And you can pretty much learn anything you want to know about those products and the new product at the Twitter page. And
cool.
We're really excited to share that with everybody.
Yeah. And hopefully sooner rather than later, you'll be offering stuff in the US.
I would love that based on what we talked about. It's just, I don't know. It's going to be tough at the moment. We're pretty much going to be forced to we don't today, but we're going to be forced to just exclude the US as a general market.
That's what's happening, folks.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. Again, Mike, thanks again so much for the time. I really appreciate it. It was a fascinating conversation.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I love talking to former Bloombergers myself. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
Thanks.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to rate and follow this show on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Decent People is a production of Decential Media. It is produced by Matt Bogart with music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes.